The spark ignites. Morgan Freeman, a man whose voice could calm a storm, sat in a room buzzing with whispers, knowing the next few minutes could change everything. One wrong word, and the world would twist his truth into a headline. One right word, and he'd light a fire nobody could put out. It was a crisp fall evening at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., the kind of place where history hangs in the air, where every seat feels like it's waiting for something big. Morgan Freeman was there for a live taping of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Not just to talk movies or charm the crowd with that voice. No, this was different. They'd invited him to discuss unity in a divided America. Sounded noble, right? But Morgan knew better. His assistant, Lena, had warned him that morning over coffee. "They're going to try to poke at you," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Colbert's team loves a viral moment. Be ready." Morgan didn't flinch. He'd been in rooms like this before. Rooms where smiles hid agendas, where every question was a test. At 88, he'd seen it all. Red carpets, courtrooms, protests, and now this. A stage where words could either build bridges or burn them down. He sat in the green room, his gray suit sharp as ever, hands resting on his knees. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a thunderstorm. A young stagehand popped in. "5 minutes, Mr. Freeman." Morgan nodded, his eyes fixed on a photo on the wall. Dr. King at the Lincoln Memorial, just a few miles from here. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and whispered to himself, "Let's do this right." The Kennedy Center's concert hall was packed. Lights blazed, cameras hummed, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Stephen Colbert bounded out, all grins and energy, cracking a quick joke about D.C. traffic to warm things up. Then he turned to the audience, his voice dropping just a touch. "Tonight, we've got a legend in the house. You know him, you love him, Morgan Freeman." The crowd erupted, clapping like they were welcoming an old friend. Morgan walked out, steady, deliberate, his presence filling the room before he even said a word. He shook Colbert's hand, gave a warm nod, and settled into the guest chair. Colbert leaned in, that signature half-smirk on his face. "Morgan, you're a national treasure, but let's get real. America's a mess right now. Everyone's shouting. Nobody's listening. Don't you think folks, maybe even folks like you, get too caught up in the feelings instead of fixing things?" The audience let out a nervous chuckle. It was a mom, wrapped in charm, but okay all the same. Morgan tilted his head, just enough to let the room know he'd caught it. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at Colbert, eyes steady, like a man who'd stared down bigger storms than this. "Feelings," Morgan said, his voice low, smooth, like gravel wrapped in velvet. "You mean when people care enough to speak up?" "That's not a problem, Stephen. That's a start." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others leaning forward. Colbert shifted in his seat, still smiling, but his fingers tapped the desk once, then again. "Sure, but doesn't all that passion sometimes drown out the solutions? Like, it's more about going viral than getting results." Another chuckle from the crowd, but it was thinner this time, like they could feel the air getting tight. Morgan leaned forward, just a fraction, his voice steady but sharper now. "Let me tell you something. When people, especially folks who've been ignored for years, finally get a chance to speak, you don't get to tell them to hush because it's too loud for you. You listen." The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet, but the kind where everyone's holding their breath, waiting for what comes next. Colbert raised an eyebrow, trying to keep it light. "So you're saying it's all about who's got the mic?" Morgan didn't miss a beat. "I'm saying the mic's been in the same hands for too long. And now that it's changing, some folks are getting nervous." That's when it hit. You could feel the shift in the room, like a wave rolling in, slow but unstoppable. Morgan wasn't just answering a question. He was drawing a line. And the crowd was with him, clapping before Colbert could jump in. Lena, watching from backstage, gripped her phone knowing this was about to blow up. But Morgan? He just sat there, calm as ever, ready for whatever came next. What do you think? Have you ever been in a moment where you had to speak your truth, no matter the quitoas? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And if this is hitting you like it's hitting me, smash that subscribe button. Let's keep telling stories that matter. The fire builds. The Kennedy Center stage lights burned bright, But the air felt heavier now, like the whole room was leaning in, waiting for Morgan Freeman to drop another truth bomb. Stephen Colbert, still perched behind his desk, tried to steer things back to his rhythm. He flashed that boyish grin, the one that usually smooths over any rough patch. "Okay, Morgan, I hear you, Dad," he said, leaning back, "but let's talk solutions. All this talk about who's got the mic, doesn't it just keep us stuck? Don't we need less noise, more progress?" The crowd murmured, some nodding like they bought the pivot. But Morgan wasn't here to play along. He sat still, his hands folded, eyes locked on Colbert like he was reading the man's soul. "Progress?" Morgan said, his voice slow, deliberate, every word landing like a stone in still water. "You don't get progress by telling people to quiet down. You get it when you stop pretending the system works for everybody." A few claps broke out, then more, until half the room was cheering. Colbert's grin tightened, just for a split second, but you could see it. Morgan was rewriting the script, and it wasn't going Colbert's way. Backstage, Lena paced, her phone buzzing with texts from Morgan's team. "He's killing it," one read. "They're going to eat this up on X," said another. But Morgan didn't care about trending. He was thinking about his mama, back in Memphis, who used to tell him, "Boy, when you speak, make it count." And right now, every word was for her, for the folks in Anacostia and Baltimore who never got a mic, for the kids who looked up to him and thought they had to shrink to fit in. Colbert leaned forward, trying to take the wheel. "All right, let's get specific. You've been pushing for education reform, right? More funding, better schools. But isn't the real issue people getting too emotional about these things? Like, passion's great, but it can block the practical stuff." It was another jab, slicker this time, dressed up as a policy question. The crowd went quiet again, waiting. Morgan let the silence sit for a beat, just long enough to make you feel it. Then he spoke, his voice softer now, but heavier, like it carried every year of his 88 on this earth. "Stephen, when a mom's fighting for her kid's school to have books that aren't falling apart, you call that emotional?" He paused, letting the image sink in. "When a teacher in Southeast DC stays late to help a kid who's got no one else, you think that's blocking progress?" The crowd started clapping again, louder now, some folks standing. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Morgan kept going. "That's not emotion getting in the way. That's love. And if you think love's the problem, you're looking at the wrong playbook." Colbert blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like he'd just realized he was playing chess with a grandmaster. The applause swelled, rolling through the concert hall like a wave. Morgan didn't smile or nod. He just sat there, steady, letting the moment breathe. But inside, he felt it. The weight of every time someone told him to tone it down, to be less, to make his voice smaller so others could feel bigger. Not tonight. Not here. Lena peeked out from backstage, her heart pounding. She knew this was more than a TV moment. This was Morgan Freeman, the man who narrated Hope for Millions, standing up for the ones who never get a spotlight. But she also knew the knives would come out soon. The headlines, the hot takes, the folks who'd call him divisive for daring to speak plain. She whispered to herself, "Keep going, boss. They can't touch you." What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for something you love, even when people told you to pipe down? Share it in the comments. I'm reading everyone. And if you're feeling this story, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. The truth sharpens. The Kennedy Center's concert hall was electric now, like the air itself was holding its breath. Morgan Freeman sat tall, his gray suit catching the stage lights, his face calm but his eyes burning with something fierce. The crowd was still buzzing from his last words, calling out love as the real fuel for change, not a roadblock. Stephen Colbert, behind his desk, wasn't grinning as wide anymore. He was trying to keep the show on track, but you could tell Morgan was steering this ship, and it was headed somewhere raw. Colbert cleared his throat, shuffling his note cards like he needed a second to regroup. "Morgan, you're making a big point about love, and it's powerful, no doubt," he said, his voice smoother now, like he was setting a trap. "But let's be honest, when people, say activists like you, get so fired up, doesn't it alienate folks who might actually agree with you? Like, isn't there a way to say it softer? The question landed like a sucker punch, dressed up as advice. The crowd went dead quiet. A few folks shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, waiting for Morgan to fire back. Morgan didn't blink. He leaned back in his chair, just a touch, letting the silence stretch until it felt like the whole world was hanging on his next word. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady, like a preacher about to drop a truth you'd carry home. Softer? He said, almost like he was tasting the word. You ever tried telling a mother her kid's school's falling apart, but do it softly? You ever look a man in the eye who's worked 40 years and can't afford his medicine and think, let me say this gentle? The crowd started murmuring, heads nodding. A man in the back let out a quiet preach. Morgan kept going, his voice rising just enough to cut through the room. I've spent my life telling stories, on screen, in rooms like this. And the one thing I've learned, people don't change when you whisper. They change when you make them feel the weight of what's wrong. The applause erupted, loud and sudden, like a dam breaking. People were on their feet now, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. A woman near the stage held her hands together like she was praying. Colbert tried to jump in, raising a hand, but the crowd drowned him out. Backstage, Lena was glued to the monitor, her hands clasped tight. She knew this wasn't just a moment, it was a reckoning. Morgan was peeling back layers, showing the world what it meant to stand firm, not just for himself, but for every person who'd ever been told to hush. She thought about her own dad, a bus driver in Richmond, who used to say, don't let nobody make you feel small. Morgan was living that right now, and it hit her like a freight train. Colbert finally got a word in, his voice a little sharper now. I get it, Morgan, but not everyone's ready for that weight. Some people just want answers, not a sermon. It was a dig, and the crowd felt it, their cheers fading into a tense hum. Morgan looked at him, really looked, like he was seeing past the TV host to the man underneath. Then he smiled, not wide, just enough to show he wasn't rattled. Answers, he said. I got answers. Fund the schools, fix the hospitals, listen to the people who've been screaming for years. But you don't get to those answers by asking folks to shrink so you can stay comfortable. The room exploded again, louder than before. Colbert's smile was gone now, replaced by a tight nod, like he knew he'd lost the round. Morgan sat back, his face calm but his presence towering, like a mountain nobody could move. Lena whispered to a stagehand, this is going viral. Bet on it. Have you ever had to speak up when someone wanted you to stay quiet? What was that moment like for you? Drop it in the comments. I'm dying to know. And if Morgan's words are hitting you deep, hit that subscribe button. These are the stories we need to share. The line is drawn. The Kennedy Center's concert hall was a pressure cooker now. The crowd was locked in, hanging on every word. Their cheers from Morgan Freeman's last answer still echoing in the rafters. Morgan sat steady, his gray suit sharp against the stage lights, his face calm but his eyes like a storm waiting to break. Stephen Colbert, behind his desk, wasn't playing the charming host anymore. His note card sat untouched, his fingers drumming lightly on the wood. He knew he was losing the room, and you could see it in the way his jaw tightened. He needed a win, and he was about to go for it. Colbert leaned forward, his voice dropping, like he was letting the audience in on a secret. Morgan, you're preaching, and it's powerful, no question, he said, pausing for effect. But here's the thing. When you talk like that, calling out systems, pointing fingers, don't you risk sounding like you're just complaining? Like, isn't leadership about taking the high road, not making folks feel guilty? The words hit hard, sharp, like a blade slipped between ribs. The crowd gasped, a few boos rippling through. It wasn't just a question. It was a dare, the kind that says, prove you're not what I'm implying. The room went still. You could hear your own heartbeat in the silence. Morgan didn't move, didn't flinch. He just looked at Colbert, his gaze steady, like a man who'd faced worse than a TV host with a point to prove. Then, slow as sunrise, he leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. Complaining, he said, his voice soft but heavy, every syllable carrying the weight of a lifetime. You think when I talk about kids in Baltimore going to school with no heat, I'm complaining? You think when I say folks in Flint still don't have clean water, I'm pointing fingers? The crowd started murmuring, heads shaking, some whispering, no way. Morgan's voice grew stronger, not louder, but deeper, like it was coming from somewhere ancient. I'm not here to make you feel guilty, Stephen. I'm here to make you see. Leadership isn't about staying quiet to keep folks comfortable. It's about saying what's true, even when it stings. The applause roared back, louder than ever. People jumping to their feet, clapping like they were trying to shake the walls. A man in the balcony shouted, "Tell it, Morgan!" A woman near the front was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her chest. Colbert tried to cut in, his voice raised. But Morgan, hold on. Nope. The crowd wasn't having it. They kept cheering, drowning him out, a wave of support crashing over the stage. Morgan didn't gloat or grin. He just sat there, his face unchanged, his presence like a lighthouse in a storm. Backstage, Lena was practically vibrating, her phone blowing up with notifications. "He's trending already," she muttered to a stagehand, who just nodded, wide-eyed. Lena thought about her grandma in Norfolk, who'd watched Morgan's movies on repeat, saying, that man speaks like he's got God's ear. Right now, it felt like he did. Then Morgan did something nobody expected. He turned to the audience, just a slight shift, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice quiet now, almost gentle. "If I sit here and tell you about people hurting, and your first thought is I'm complaining, what does that say about how you hear me?" The room froze. No claps, no cheers, just a heavy, living silence. "I'm not asking for pity," he continued. "I'm asking for you to listen. Because the moment you call truth complaining, you are not debating, you're dodging." That was it, the line that broke the internet before the show even ended. The crowd erupted again, but it wasn't just cheers. It was something deeper, like they'd all been seen, heard, lifted. Colbert sat back, his hands flat on the desk, his face blank for a split second before he forced a nod. He knew he'd swung and missed. Morgan Freeman, 88 years old, had just turned a TV stage into a church, and nobody was walking away the same. What do you think? Has someone ever called your truth complaining when you were just trying to be heard? Share it in the comments. I'm all ears. And if this moment's giving you chills, hit that subscribe button. We're telling stories that cut deep. The stand that shook the world. The Kennedy Center was a powder keg. Morgan Freeman's words, "You're not debating, you're dodging," still hung in the air, the crowd roaring. Stephen Colbert, rattled, tried one last swing. "Morgan, doesn't your truth shut down the conversation you want?" he asked, voice tight. The room froze. Morgan looked at him, then the audience, his eyes steady. "I'm not here to define truth," he said, voice like steel. "I'm here to say nobody buries it. And when you call pain too much, you're asking folks to disappear." Then the line that broke everything. "I'm not disappearing, and neither are they." The crowd erupted. Cheers, tears, fists in the air. A woman sobbed. A man shouted, "Yes!" Colbert sat back, speechless. Backstage, Lena cried, whispering, "This is why he's Morgan." Clips of that moment, "I'm not disappearing," spread like wildfire on X, captioned, "This is courage." Morgan sat calm, his stand for the voiceless shaking the world. Ever refused to disappear when someone tried to silence you? Share it in the comments. The ripple spreads. The Kennedy Center's lights dimmed, but Morgan Freeman's words, "I'm not disappearing," lit up the world. The crowd was still cheering as Morgan stepped off stage. Lena rushed up, eyes wet. "You're trending everywhere," she said. Morgan nodded, handing off his mic. "Let him talk." His phone buzzed, texts from friends, his sister in Charleston. "You spoke for us." A teacher in St. Louis posted her students watching the clip, one saying, "I want to be like that." A grandma in Mobile wrote, "You gave me my voice." But the backlash came too. Pundits called him divisive. Headlines screamed, "Morgan blasts Colbert." In his D.C. hotel, Morgan ignored the noise, reading real stories, a nurse in Detroit, a dad in Tucson, all standing taller. He thought of his mama. Speak for the silent. He had, and they were listening. When have you felt your voice finally mattered? Tell me in the comments. The legacy lives on. Morning broke over D.C., the Lincoln Memorial glowing nearby. Morgan Freeman sipped coffee in his hotel. His words, "I'm not disappearing," still trending. He skipped the news, reading messages instead. A Memphis teacher whose shy students spoke up. A Boise nurse who felt seen. Lena said, "They're calling you a hero." Morgan smiled. "I'm just a man done shrinking." He zoomed with Chicago kids, one saying, "You showed me I don't have to be quiet." The backlash, pundits calling him too intense, faded against stories of a Pittsburgh grandma speaking out, a Miami student taping his quote to her mirror. Morgan thought of his mama. Use your voice for others. He did. Now they were too. This is your story too. Where did you stand tall? Share in the comments and subscribe for more stories that lift us up.